Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, hopefully everyone's picked up on the new jingle there, Curtis, because if they didn't, then they didn't listen to last week's podcast with Phil and Lucy.
Yeah, definitely. So new jingles recorded for us by Steve Whitten with the new branding for Motors. So we've got a whole new suite of jingles now, haven't we?
We have. So stay tuned for all of those. But as I mentioned there, if you didn't listen to last Saturday's podcast, we had the pleasure of being joined by Phil Jones and Lucy Tugby from Motors, explaining the new branding of their business, and they also shared a little bit of sort of market insight from Market View, didn't they, as well on the chat there. So it was a good little catch up with Phil and Lucy.
Yeah, definitely. And talking of catch-ups, this week we've got an extract from the interview we did with industry guru Steve Young from ICDP, and he's talking about in the full interview he talks about the top 50 European dealer groups which ICDP collates. He talks about agency electrification, and particularly interesting I found was his take on why shopping mall outlets aren't necessarily the expensive flag wavers we always thought they were. But we'll have an extract from that in today's show, but the full pod is available now on your podcast feed.
And as Curtis has mentioned there, Stephen Whitten is also our mental wealth guru, and he'll be joining us halfway through today's podcast with his latest Men-able moment. And just a little bit of a spoiler there, or a warning, depending how you want to take it, but he does burst into a little bit of song, a little bit of Christmas spirit there. So, a great little interlude there with Stephen Whitten.
Yeah, get your earplugs out now. And a shout out for the AM Awards because they were launched last week and the deadline for entries is the 31st of January. So not a huge amount of time there to start looking at nominating yourselves. So do head over to the AM online website.
Yes, and the we can't talk this week without the latest from our friend of the podcast, Dash Gupta. And if you've missed the update this week, then where have you been? We want to wish the best of luck with for Dash on a new adventure. And we would say bon voyage to Dash, but he announces that it will be appointed as CEO of Hughes Gray Group, which is a major UK building merchant with more than 5,000 staff across more than 300 trading and distribution locations. So that's a big business, Curtis.
It is, yeah. And I suspect Hughes Gray Group received a lot of traffic via Google this week because everyone in the industry, once they heard that Dash was going there, would have Googled them to find out who they are, what they do. But as you say, that's actually a big business because they've got 300 trading and distribution locations. And knowing Dash as we do, he will be looking at scaling and scaling upwards from there. So it's going to be interesting to just keep tabs on Hughes Gray Group over the coming years, don't you think?
Definitely. And they're not on the stock market yet, but I would certainly be keeping an eye on that one if it does ever get onto the stock market, because knowing Dash, he'll be looking at how he can scale this business, and obviously then he'll be looking at how he can get this business in that in terms of that staff retention and things like this. So really looking forward to keeping an eye on this one. But he does say that he's keeping a very close eye on the automotive industry. We're not sure whether he is. I think he's remaining in the role of vice president of the IMI, and I think he's also still connected with the Ben charity, isn't he? So there's no announcement on any of those as yet. So he's still got his toes in the automotive sector. So as we always say, you never know, do you?
Yeah, and I'd like to think he'll still be tuning into the Motor Trade Radio podcast.
Yes, hopefully will be. And if you are listening, Dash, then potentially give us a shout. Come on, tell us what you're up to and what it's like, because I know you're starting in January, so maybe let you get your feet under the table first.
Headlines this week come from Car Dealer, AM, Auto Retail Agenda, and Automotive News Europe. Starting with fleets fuel November's new car market as the month returns to pre-pandemic levels. New van demand grows for the 11th month in a row. No haggle agency sales underestimate the value dealers bring to sales process, says Suzuki UK boss. Car makers win delay on EU tariffs for UK-built EVs, and Lookers CEO Mark Rayban to leave Lookers as staff redundancies announced.
But first up, before that, we've got an extract from our interview, as Curtis said earlier, with ICDP's Steve Young, where we asked him for his views on franchise groups running multi-brand car supermarkets, and that was following the announcement that Inchcape was closing 8 of its 17 Bravo Auto sites in the UK there.
What's your view on why some franchise groups, certainly Inchcape, and we've reported on Peter Vardy as well, are struggling with this whole car supermarket concept? Is the model flawed from a sort of franchise dealer group perspective? What do you think?
Well, I think just commenting on Bravo Auto sort of briefly, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg with Inchcape in the UK nowadays, because they've become much more focused on their activities elsewhere, and Bravo Auto is something which they've rolled out pretty much on a global basis. Anywhere where there's Inchcape, then you'll find there's Bravo Auto, and they're competing in a obviously quite different market environment. So perhaps Bravo Auto has had its time, or will be more restricted in the UK than in the past, but it doesn't mean that from an Inchcape point of view it's dead. In terms of the general problems with Bravo Auto or Peter Vardy, then we do have this challenge with restricted supply of used cars, and we're going to have that for another 3 years because of the supply shortages that we had over the previous 3 years. There is this sort of structural dip in the volumes that will come through, and when you've got restricted supply, then that's going to make it tough for anyone who's operating independently and needs volume, because all of these businesses have been built on the back of needing a volume. And you could look at some of the other independents, you could even Kazoo and so on as well. They need to source cars in a market where the cake is shrinking, and the franchise dealers have got an advantage in terms of getting the cars that are coming off lease from the manufacturers and coming off PCPs and so on. So that makes it challenging for them in general to maintain the overhead, and that was Peter Vardy's reason why he pulled out. I'm sure it's part of what sits behind Bravo Auto. If you've got restricted supply and it's a decent quality car, would you not sell it through the franchised dealer channel and try and get a bit more of a premium for that? Particularly if you're a multi-brand group and you can move it from the Audi dealer to the BMW dealer or whatever, rather than put it through a channel where you're probably having to be a bit more competitive on price. You'll maximize the profit. I think Pete Waddell's force of nature, isn't he? So
he certainly is. Yes.
Choose your words carefully there.
Yeah, well, he manages to buck the trend, but
he does,
and that's that's good on him. But I mean, I think he came out of the womb probably selling used cars. I spoke to a CEO of a sort of leading dealer group and one who's extremely strong on used cars recently, and because we were asking very much this question, what holds franchise dealers back, and he just said it's got to be in your DNA. That you can't just play with used cars. It's either in your DNA or it's not. Was his view. It's a bit of sort of nature versus nurture, I suppose. And you really do need to be committed, and I think that's the secret of Pete Waddell, but it's also what sits behind businesses like Arnold Clark and so on.
Well, great chat as ever with Steve Young there, and some interesting points he makes about how successful multi-brand used car selling has really got to be in your DNA, which explains why we've seen groups like Inchcape and indeed Peter Vardy pull back from that side of their businesses, while the likes of Big Motoring World just keep expanding. So interesting take on the dynamics driving that part of the sort of franchise side of the market.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do want to listen to the full interview, as I said, it's on your podcast feed from Wednesday. It was on Wednesday of this week. So do have a listen back with that, because Steve shares a lot more information on the European market and particularly the top dealers within that sector and everything else. So please do listen back to that.
First headline of the week is from AM Online, and it is Fleets fuel new car sales, but EV challenge remains. November's registrations actually grew by 9.5% to reach 156,500 units, with growth pretty much entirely driven by fleets, with fleet registrations rising by 25.4% to account for just over 93,000 units. And that accounted for 59% of the total market. So strong month for fleet, not a great month for private demand, which was depressed, dropping 5.9% to 60,500 units. And business, so those sales to businesses operating under 25 cars, that fell 32.7% to just shy of 3,000 units.
Yeah, and interesting. There's been some shifting around in the fuel type as well. I mean, the year on year full battery electric vehicle, the BEV market has actually declined year on year for the month of November by 17.1%. So that's down from just over 29,000 registrations in November 2022, down to just over 24,000 in November this year. However, plug-in hybrid rose 55.8%, up from 10,186 to just short of 16,000. So a bit of a shift there from plug-in to plug-in hybrids, from full battery electric vehicles. But that does take the year-to-date performance for full battery electric vehicles up 27.5% year on year to just over 286,000. So quite a shift now. So that's taking the battery electric vehicle market to a 16.3% share of the market. Plug-in hybrids up to 7.3% share of the market. Diesel down to 3.8% share of the market, and that's down from 5.3% for the same period of 2022.
Yeah, and it's probably just worth adding on those EVs. Okay, registration is down 17%, but within the story, it does point out that November last year was particularly strong for EVs due to an easing of some of the supply chain issues that we saw in the first half of last year. But the overall figures are quite interesting, aren't they? Because it's just 96 cars shy of where we were in 2019. So I know you love to love to go for a deep dive into the data and the stats, but that's pretty encouraging, isn't it? And I wonder if this is now what we're going to be seeing in successive months, sort of beating those pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, and without banging the drum a bit more, we know that, as you pointed out right at the start, Curtis, the fleet market is where the registrations are now going, whether that's natural fleet or pushed fleet. But clearly, we knew the fourth quarter of this year that was where the focus was going to be. We've talked. There's been a lot of noise and there's a lot of media coverage around tactical or pre-reg activity now as OEMs look to, either push for market share in this sort of final period of the year, or they're doing it by fuel type because of the ZEV mandate that comes into force next year. But it kind of feels that we are now back into pre-pandemic activity, whether you describe that as push market or whatever way you want to describe the market. But a little bit of what we would probably class as UK normality around registrations is creeping back in clearly now.
So we've got normality in the UK. I understand you've got some figures for the rest of Europe.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a bit around Europe. I mean, interestingly, Germany was down 5.7% in the month of November, down to 245,700. France, on the other hand, grew 14%, so they went up to 152,700. Italy grew 16.4% year on year to 139,300, and Spain marginally up to 78,300, up by 7% year on year. So not, when you start looking at European markets, not quite the same right across there. Germany seems to be struggling, but we know Germany have got a little bit of financial challenges at the minute in the economy. But you look at Italy there, you look at Spain, you look at France, some good growth year on year across some of the European markets.
Yeah, we need to keep an eye on that German market, don't we? Because it is the biggest market in Europe. And if it is depressed, then the ramifications could be quite significant there.
Definitely. And I think we've got some content on LCV as well, haven't we?
We have indeed. So heading over to Car Dealer, the headline there is new van demand grows for 11th month in a row, but EV uptake needs 2024 boost, says SMMT. So yeah, new van regs for the month. So they grew for the 11th month in a row at 27,433 units, and that covers vans, pickups, and 4x4s. That was just shy of a 13% rise and was 4.6% above November 2019 pre-pandemic level. So again, interesting to see where we are against those pre-pandemic figures in November 2019.
Definitely. And sticking with Car Dealer, and this is an update from actually myself on the latest content from the Insight report that we published in the month of October. And no haggle agency sales underestimate value dealers bring to sales process. And this is comments from our friend of the podcast, Dale Wyatt, from Suzuki UK, and saying that some car makers see dealers as a supplier, he says. He said that the latest attack echoes words Wyatt had a car dealer live as well back in March. So we know that Dale was on stage at the car dealer live event back in March of this year. But he doesn't hold punches on his opinion towards agency model, does he, Curtis?
He doesn't, and that's why one of the reasons we like Dale so much. He really does tell it as it is. He shoots from the hip, and there's some interesting comments from him within this. He does say some manufacturers view the dealer as a cost, and they want to use agency to effect a knowledge and relationship transfer. I think some manufacturers underestimate the value that the dealer brings. They see the dealer as almost a supplier, a service provider, subcontractor rather than a partner. Suzuki clearly doesn't do that, which is why Suzuki always does well in the dealer satisfaction polls, because the Suzuki network is a lot happier than other networks, because I think basically because the brand values what they bring to the party, and acknowledge that they are not retailers. It's the dealers that know how to retail. They have the expertise, which is a point he develops in this piece, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I mean, we touched on a little bit of the latest with the agency model last week, with obviously Lotus reported to be doing a U-turn on agency model. We know that it was also reported that BMW Mini had deferred their go to market for agency. Dale is quoted in the release there by Car Dealer saying that back in the conference in March of this year, that he was quoted in saying that as Suzuki is an established manufacturer, if I'm serious about agency, then I need to go to fire my management team, he said. Fire me and hire Dash Gupta, because I'm not a retailer. So yeah, he's fairly direct on that opinion. But we also know that as we are recording this week, that there's been an interview with Maria from Stellantis, who is the new UK boss of Stellantis. And within that story, she refers to that there is a delay now on Stellantis' plans to go to agency, pushing that out to sort of 2026 there. So again, you can see these manufacturers just rethinking what they are doing around going to market with agency now.
Yeah, and that Stellantis one is interesting because there were a number of brands that were going to go over to agency fairly soon. So, yeah, everything now has been put back until at least the end of 2026. So they will be looking at the market very closely to see how everyone else is getting on.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Men-Able moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector. With me, Stephen Whittam.
Yeah, hi guys, it's Men-Able moments time again, and I've just got one thing to say. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Good God, don't give up the day job, Whitten. Are you sick of hearing Christmas songs yet? Are you sick of going round and seeing all the preparations and stuff? Or is Christmas a period of the year that you love? Do you enjoy it? Are you looking forward to it? Are you looking forward to having a bit of a break? So, whatever it is, whatever Christmas represents for you, obviously we want you to enjoy it. We're not quite there yet. We've got a couple of weeks to go, haven't we? But I just wanted to give a little bit of a mention and a shout out and encourage us all to just take a couple of minutes to just remember some of those people around you that perhaps for them, Christmas isn't that real big season of love and joy and goodwill and all of that stuff. And it could just be that they're on their own, or life has taken various turns and it's meant that things for them haven't turned out the way that they'd hoped. And so sometimes Christmas can be the real thing that brings that home and brings home the loneliness and, you know, just being on their own, really. So I want you to just take a few minutes over the next couple of weeks to just, you know, look around you, and as your business starts to properly ramp up for Christmas, and no doubt you've got decorations around, maybe you do a Christmas jumper day, maybe you're exchanging Secret Santa gifts, maybe you've got, you know, a bit of a buffet lunch thing happening at some point. Whatever it is that you're doing to thank your team and to celebrate the Christmas period, which is all wonderful and great and absolutely should be done, just spare a moment for some of those people around you who perhaps don't feel it in the same way as you do or as other people do. And, you know, speaking for myself, I can always remember Christmases, whilst they were wonderful and we really looked forward to having all the family together and, you know, good times and enjoying ourselves, it was always fraught with the stress that a month later there's going to be a £1,200 credit card bill. And I could never get that out of my mind as somebody who used to really fret about money and all the worries that came with that. That was a big deal. That was a really big deal. And those things have gone now. Don't have those worries anymore, fortunately. But I am very mindful that there are other things. So, for example, my story is well published and people know, but this will now be my 4th Christmas, I think, on my own. And I quite like it, actually. I quite enjoy it. And that's no reflection on what was going on for me before, but it is a good time for me to just down tools completely and just stop and think and reflect. But again, bear in mind that that's coming from a position of mental wealth and the work that I've managed to do on myself to get to that place. Can't say it was always like that, because again, Christmas, really, the commercial side of it suggests that it's all about happy and joy and being together. And I just want us to just spend a few minutes thinking about those people around you, that for them, the big Christmas celebration is at best neither here nor there, and at worst really ramps up the feelings of being alone and, not necessarily being as connected as some people are. So whatever you're doing over the next couple of weeks, I think I'll see you anyway before the Christmas break, because we're going to squeeze another one in before the end of the year. But whatever you're doing, enjoy yourself and have a great time. And just make sure everyone's included. All right, take care. You know how to get hold of me, stephen.witten@menable.org. And I will catch up with you again soon. Take care. Bye.
Well, very poignant as ever. Some interesting observations there from Stephen Whitten. And as he says, if you need to get hold of him, if you want to make contact and really find out what Menable can do for yourself and your business, then do drop him an email at stephen.witten@menable.org, and that's Stephen with a PH, or head over to menable.org online.
Yeah, as you say there, Curtis, Christmas is not the same for everybody. And, please do listen to what Stephen Whitten has said there. That, there are a lot of people that either on their own or, for whatever reason, or they want to be on their own. So please do check on people this Christmas and just be there for everybody. So heading back to the headlines, automotive news Europe, and this has been, it was kind of where do we pick the story this week, Curtis? Because this is an industry big. We always knew it was going to be potentially the 11th hour. I think it's probably a little bit earlier than some skeptics might have suggested on this, but this is about the rules of origin in terms of the tariffs between the UK and Europe, and particularly when it comes to the battery electric vehicle market, because of obviously the percentage share of a cost of a battery electric vehicle that is down to the battery. So good news is there is an agreement that it will be deferred, and this is, like I said, been covered a lot across the sector this week, and I suspect a sign of relief for some dealers as well as OEMs on this one.
Yeah, you're right. It is a welcome good news story, and it is a victory for common sense as well, because as you mentioned, it's very much 11th hour. This one did pretty much go down to the wire, because the new rules of origin were due to come in on the 1st of January. So
yes,
it didn't leave.
Could have been worse. It could have been between Christmas and New Year. Do you remember that one, Curtis?
Yeah. But so it removes that uncertainty, and I think a lot of it has been down to the work of ACEA, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, who've been lobbying against this, because they point out that Europe's biggest trading partner, believe it or not, is the UK, and the UK's biggest trading partner is Europe. So having these cars with tariffs going into the UK would have rendered many of them unsellable. I mean, it was ridiculous amounts of money that were being applied. But that will not happen now. As you say, there's a 3-year deferment, by which time, hopefully, that means that some of the locally produced batteries will be more on stream, more available, and will reduce the need for tariffs to be implied, because the content will be more UK or European rather than overseas.
Exactly, and I think the Chinese brands were probably the standout statement within this, that because obviously Europe were trying to say that by imposing the tariff so early on, before the manufacturers can get their locally sourced batteries for the BEV market, then it would open up the doors for the Chinese manufacturers to flood Europe and the UK with their products, and the statements such as helping Chinese brands and such like. But clearly, that as you say, there Europe have been pushing quite hard for this, because some of the numbers that they've been stating, sort of eye-watering numbers, saying that the European car makers lobby group warned that the duties could cost the sector 4.3 billion euros over the next 3 years, and that the UK Industry Association, SMMT, said the tariffs would add about £3,600 to the cost of a typical British-built battery electric vehicle sold in Europe. So, this is key, that at the minute where the cost of a battery electric vehicle is a blocker for many people into it, in terms of that total cost of ownership and that entry point into the battery electric vehicle market, and adding this tariff on that could go up to £3,400 on average between the UK and EU, it just pushes it further away and will make the transition to EV that much harder in the short term.
Yeah, and you know what, Phil, I really hope this is the last time we talk about rules of origin for at least 3 years.
Because it's trying to get your head around it. Yes.
Yeah, just when you think you have got your head around it, you haven't.
Yeah, it's not the easiest. I mean, at least next year we can just focus on the ZEV mandate now, and not
Yes,
the rules of origin now, and let the manufacturers focus on getting their battery manufacturing and locally sourced batteries underway, and hopefully in a better place by 3 years' time, or that the cost of a battery electric vehicle can absorb any tariffs that might be incurred in 3 years' time. But one that we'll be keeping a close eye on, and I suspect it won't be ended now, Curtis. We will be talking about this one a lot more, I suspect.
Oh, really? Oh, dear.
Oh, dear.
Last two stories this week are from Auto Retail Agenda, and they're very much about staff moves. So if we start with Mark Raban and 200 staff to leave Lookers, this story was I think it was put out over the weekend or just after the weekend by Auto Retail Agenda, and was subsequently picked up by other publications over the course of the week. But it is news that Mark Raban has resigned as CEO of Lookers, and he'll be leaving the group at the end of this month, the end of December. And the announcement comes as the group has announced around 200 redundancies, and that is linked to the group to the privatization of the business, the delisting of the business. Now, a spokesman for Lookers actually confirmed a number of people linked to the central support function of running a PLC have had redundancy notices, and that number is around 3% of Lookers' overall staff count of 6,500 employees. So that's where that 200 figure comes from. But it is all down to this delisting, and some of the job functions no longer being required as the company sits outside of the stock market.
Yeah, and there is a final statement in the story saying that that the move follows obviously the takeover of Lookers by Canadian firm Alpha Auto Group for the figure of 504 million, and that was back in October of this year, and that the auto retail agenda understands that the cutbacks will help reduce costs, enabling the firm to better service the debt of the purchase. So again, we'll see what happens there, and Lookers have not yet announced a replacement for Ray-Ban. So yeah, I will see what will come from that and what transpires.
Yeah, and it's worth looking at some of the coverage in Car Dealer subsequent to this story going out, because they do actually talk to some of the employees, some of the affected employees, and you can imagine that they're very unhappy, because it looks those certain assurances that were made are now being sort of questioned.
And final story for this week, again remaining with auto retail agenda, and that more Marshall directors departures. So this is a report within, I'd say, auto retail agenda. They're led to believe, and they understand that there is further directors that either resignations of some of the directors within the Marshall Motor Group recently on that. So I think this the stories say it's no confirmation, I don't think, from Marshall Motor Group. It's what auto retail have been led to believe.
Yeah, and it does follow on from earlier this year, when it was announced that directors, including Joe Moxon, HR director, CFO Richard Bloomberger, and company secretary Stephen Jones had left the business. And the piece does go on to say that the latest departures means that pretty much the majority of the senior team assembled by Dash Gupta when he was CEO have left the business since it was bought by Constellation 18 months ago. So there's big changes there at Marshall.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll probably get to cover this story again when anything is fully confirmed, whether there'll be a statement coming out in due course, or how that will be confirmed. Because at the minute, this is, I think there's I don't know, a speculation. I don't know if you can call it speculation, can you, Curtis? Or is it? I don't know. It's not a confirmation, has it? Clearly from Marshall's.
Yeah, Auto Retail Agenda sign off their story saying that Marshall Motor Group was approached for a comment, but it looks though there was nothing forthcoming when they. I was going to say they went to print, but
it's digital now, Curtis.
Yeah. When they posted it online.
Yes. So, I mean, that's it for this week, and hopefully we've managed to capture the majority of the big headlines in the media this week. There's obviously a lot more, and there has been some big ones there, whether that's Dash Gupta leaving or partially leaving the sector. We don't know what connections he's got back in the sector, and again, it would be great to catch up with Dash in due course on the podcast. The interview there, snippet from the interview there with Steve Young from ICDP, and as I said earlier on in the podcast today, I urge you to listen to the full interview there with Steve Young. Always a fascinating and insightful interview every time we manage to grab some of Steve's time on the podcast. But again, lots of stories breaking all the time at the minute, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. We're not heading quietly into Christmas, are we?
No, certainly not. No.
But you know what? That's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.